Okay, here we go. Now we got some film is rolling.
I'm ready for my close-up.
Now turn that book toward me so I can get a close
Oh,
up
you
on.
want to see the book too?
Yes, that's going on YouTube as well. This is an incredibly interesting cover, you all. It looks like a box of washing powder. It's
That's
very
interesting you say that.
it's very interesting because it looks it's very professionally done because you're a former ad man, correct?
I'm a recovering ad man.
A recovering ad man turned race man. He goes by the tag of Lowell RaceMan Thompson.
The brother man from the other land.
So again, we see the thesis continues. Your race relations thesis continues from Race Man Answer, which I got through most of that book.
Hmm.
I got up to page 52.
That's good. It's
Unfor-
only 66 pages.
Unfortunately, it got damaged because I carried it back and forth to work every
Oh,
day to
see that?
work,
See?
and my water bottle in my duffel bag opened, and that was the end of
Shame,
that
shame.
was the end of the race man answers. So I had to
Race
provide my
man
own.
drowned.
Right, race man drown. So why a novel this time, and why a brand new race? Let's hear a little bit about that.
Well, I'm glad you asked me that, Mark. I mean, is it okay? Could I be so familiar as to call you Marcus, or do I have to say Mr. Burks?
Oh, Marcus is fine. Most people call me a Mark. You know,
Amar.
a Mark.
That's interesting.
Yeah, but they call most people go by the tag Mark. You know, the
Hmm.
short Marcus.
Hmm.
But anyway, yes, Marcus is fine. You're the guest today, so I should be asking, begging your partner, asking your permission, especially you being a novelist now. Why a novel this time?
That's a good question. I'm glad you asked that question because I've written, as I said, I've written. This will be my fourth book. So I've written three books prior to this, and I helped write another book that became pretty popular, Brainwashed, with Tom Burrell. But this is my first novel, and although I did help write a play, a friend of mine and I wrote a play called Rehab, but this is my first novel, and the reason I thought it was important to turn this into a novel because the original idea was to be another nonfiction book. But as I started writing it, and I don't know, something said, well, why did you think about writing it as fiction and as a novel? And for some reason, I had the just idea that in order to be serious and to be taken seriously, and because I read mostly nonfiction, that I needed to do research, do information, find factual data on what I'm talking about, and to verify what I'm saying. But I've already done that. I mean, I've done that for the last 20 years. And so the idea of turning this into fiction was scary at first, but when I started doing it, I found out that it is a different experience from writing nonfiction, and it is more fun to some extent, but then it's more scary to another extent because I didn't know from the beginning how it was going to turn out. With nonfiction, I basically have figured out basically kind of how it's going to turn out. I know kind of what it's going to be about, but then I have to do research to verify my thoughts and to extend my thoughts to the point where it covers the arguments that people might have about what I'm saying. With fiction, I'm basically making it up, but because I've been doing this so long, it's based on information and research and factual data that it's automatic. It's already in me. I don't have to even do the research as much for this because the research is in my personal subjective experience. So when I write a line of dialogue, I say something that somebody says, I talk about a place that somebody is. This is stuff that I'm living every day. The beauty part is that it's because it's fiction, I'm coming up with ideas and using stuff that I had never used in nonfiction. I'm using techniques that I'd never used, like dialogue. And it is, for me, more interesting, more exciting. It's like I'm reading my own book and waiting for it to waiting to see what happens next. So it's an exciting experience that I never even knew that would be this great. But the scary part is that you really don't know how it's going to turn out. So
Now, So it sounds like a roller coaster ride, like you're at Six Flags or something.
Yeah,
It's
yeah, it
it's
is.
it's fun and thrilling at the same time.
Right, right, and scary.
So now, what inspired the subject, brand new race? That's what I really want to know.
Okay, well, the part that I had already before I decided to make it into a novel was the title, and I'd had the title for maybe 2 or 3 years. I bought the domain names as I always do when I have something I think is a great title, and I bought brandnewrace.com, and it's brand as in branding, as in branding in terms of branding a product, like a Coca-Cola, that's a brand, and Apple computers, that's a brand, and Google, these are brands. That's a brand. And brand as it relates to branding human beings. And by branding them, by saying that an outward sign, a, uh, a an obvious characteristic becomes the trait by which this human being is defined, that's a form of branding. Also, the branding as related to slaves like cattle. When humans became, in terms of the law of the United States, cattle, then slaves were branded, physically branded, with branding irons. So that was my original idea, is that brand, and use my background, my experience in advertising, 35 years creating advertising and promoting brands and branding products, and relating that to brands as it related to branding human beings, subhumans, which is what happened and was the basis of the American economy for over 200 years. This was the labor force that enabled the Americrats, I call them, to develop the land and to make money off the land for over 200 years. So the branding as relates to the economy and the economics of America is very similar. I say that African Americans were the first big brand in this country, and it was the most important brand for over 200 years. So when I came up with the concept of brand new race, and I said, "Oh, that's interesting. I'm going to use what I've learned as an ad man, as I did in my other book, nonfiction book, Race Man Answers. I'm going to use what I learned in advertising, but I'm going to use it from a fictional perspective. This book actually takes place about 30 to 50 years in the future. And the key element of the book that usually gets people excited, is that the book starts out with a headline, a newspaper headline. And the headline is, Whites will be a minority in U.S. much sooner than thought.
Now that's incredibly interesting. I don't know how many of our white listeners just turned off the radio with that statement, but that's an incredible, because that has been basically an observation that's been made that I know of probably about the last 20 years. I
Mm-hmm.
remember, I think 2020 did a special called The Browning of America. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
if you remember that. And I think they were not only talking about the black race proliferating, I think they also mentioned the Hispanic race proliferating and taking over, and how the white population was basically being canceled out. I think that's what what's the name of that D.W. Griffith.
Yeah, the birth of a nation.
And I think that's what they kind of expressed, that we become a melting pot, one big mongrel or
A
world.
mongrel race.
They're a mongrel race. So, and which means that leaves the white population out. But that's been a speculation for years. So it's very interesting that you had used that as basically the, I guess, synopsis of your book, or the
That's the introduction to my book.
that's incredibly
See
interesting.
what you're saying, that you saw this, what, how many years ago, in 2020?
Oh, that was in the '90s when I saw it.
Okay, and it's I'm not surprised, because that has been an issue in this country since the first European, or Euram I call them, European American, Euro American, when they first got over here and they brought the first slaves within the Jamestown colony in Virginia. They had to start thinking at that point, if they were thinking, well, what if these people that we're bringing over here become more populous than we are? What do we do? It became even a bigger problem when the United States of America was formed, and they formed the Constitution and the Declaration, and they did the Declaration of Independence, they had to decide what are we going to do, or think about what happens. Now, evidently, they didn't think too deeply because it is an issue. And when I say brand new race, I'm not talking about a race as it relates to the concept that has been created by the elite, what I call the Americrats, of the European American population, the idea that the human species could be divided into races. That's been proven to be wrong by geneticists and people who study such things for at least 65, 75 years. The realities of science. But you can do it politically, and that's what we have here in these United States now. And when I'm talking about brand new race, I don't want you to assume, or anybody out there to assume, that I'm talking about the black race taking over the white race and killing the white folks and all. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the human race being reborn and being updated to now and the future, not the past.
That's incredibly interesting. And this cover that you have that looks like a box of
Wait a minute,
washing.
don't tell them
Oh,
yet.
okay,
Don't tell them,
okay,
because the whole concept of the cover was based on a visual symbol. And you know, I'm a graphic designer and an artist and stuff, and a former ad man, so I always try to come up with a great cover. And when I came up with the cover, I came up with lots of ideas. But when I came up with this cover, I thought I had it licked. I had my problem licked. But then when I showed it to people, I do always do test marketing on my ideas. So I just kind of show it to different people and see what they think. I said, what does this remind you of? Without them reading the title or anything, just what does this visual remind you of? More people said one thing than the other, and most did not say my original concept. Now, you just said it.
okay.
You got the original concept, but most people did not. What else does this cover remind you of other than the one you said?
Um, that's the only one that comes to mind seriously
That's
because
interesting.
I can't really think too much past
Okay,
that.
you ever hear of Looney Tunes?
Oh yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
okay. See that? Looney Tunes. But the one you said was my original concept. One of the reasons why it didn't come across like it could have is because I changed the colors deliberately.
Yeah, raise that up a little bit.
I changed the colors
Thank you.
deliberately
Okay.
so that they're not the orange colors of the box that of detergent that this reminds you of, which is Tide.
Right, that's exactly reminds me of a box
Okay,
of
a box
Tide.
of Tide, right?
Exactly.
But I didn't want to go too close to their colors because I didn't want to get into any copyright or trademark
Infringements.
infringement problems. So I combined the colors of Looney Tunes and Superman and a pop culture, grab you by the neck colors and equated it to brand new, as in brand new, improved Tide or Cheer or whatever. And it's there for a purpose because the whole purpose of this book is to show how the human race has been branded, how that brand was sold to America, and then is it possible to unbrand the people in this country and to create a new brand? Is that possible?
Now, is that part of your observation, no, your exploration in this 50 years in the future of the book to how can I say this, to unbrand and create a brand new race? Is that part of the purpose of the book?
That's the challenge.
That's the challenge.
That's the conundrum. That's the as in the Maltese Falcon. That's the Genghis. What do they call it? The bird. That falcon. It was that thing that people are afraid of, or are trying to reach for, or are not sure of. It is that thing in the future that we're almost afraid to think about because it's so overwhelming that this book is about. Is it possible for this country, after over 240 some years, to now actually live up to what it says it was, because I went back over 150 years and found a quote by a guy that said this country was a new race of men. He saw this country over 100 and I think it was 150 some years ago. He saw this country. Now he was a European who came to this country, and he said this is a new race of men. He was wrong, of course, or at least the people in the country, at least the people who ran the country, the owners of the country, the people I call the Americrats, they did not want to create a new race of men in terms of an inclusive, all inclusive, multicolored, multicultural, multi talented, multi dimensional race that included everybody in the human species. They wanted to confine the race to people that look like them.
Lord, I'm going to jump in right quick. I got a phone call. I think somebody's at the door, the next DJ. So we're going to continue as soon as I take care of this business real quick. You are listening to Lowell RaceMan Thompson speaking about his new book, Brand New Race. And in the background, you are listening to the ESP project featuring David Dowie Williams, LEL, Sherman LEL Story on soprano saxophone. And I will get the rest of that personnel to you in 1 second. As soon as I answer this door, I shall return and have continue my interview with Lowell Raceman Thompson. Take care, and I shall be back in a second.